Hi everyone, this is Yuri from Data Forest, and it means that we are recording another episode of our amazing podcast, Empower the Data, where the business begins with data and AI leads the way. And today we have very unusual guest in our studio, and I'm kind of excited about that because I've never heard about solution that these guys offer. We're gonna talk about this in a second, but right now, William, say hello to our audience and our listeners and watchers.
Thank you, Yuri. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. And thank you, Yuri, for inviting me to this podcast.
Yeah, that's the pleasure to having you here. Thank you for finding the time in your schedule for this recording. I really appreciate it. So, our guest is Willem De Vries, and for those who doesn't know, I guess not everybody familiar with the things that you do. I can say that Willem is a founder of one very interesting company that called Charged Islands. Charged Islands has the mission to decarbonize islands that obtain their electricity from diesel generation today. And for me, that sounds really interesting because we already had some guests and speakers before who work in the energy sector, but I've never talked to people who can charge the entire island. So I want to learn a little bit more about you. How did you end up by doing this? And please tell us a little bit more about the company. So the word for you.
Thank you, Yuri. Yes. So it is a little bit out of ordinary indeed. I'm now in London and I attended a conference here on batteries, and truly, I think I'm the only one that came up with this storylining. So first of all, Charged Islands is a very young company indeed. We have started this summer. Me, myself, and three other founders. We spotted a business case that I will try to explain in a second a little bit more. I'm the only one that jumped out of his job to start preparing the road, and the others are spending their weekends and evenings, but still in their jobs. As a consequence, I also can't mention them here because they're working for renowned energy companies, and I think everybody understands this. So what we have figured out is that well, obviously, solar is known to everybody, and that solar production can actually be very, very cheap and attractive commercially. This has also been applied on islands before, in particular islands close to the equator, where yes, you have a lot of solar generation. But until now, that's more or less where it got. Small projects on these islands, generating power during the day, and in a certain way, actually being a nuisance to the utility companies, to the operators, because they needed to ramp up and down with their diesels to compensate for all the variation that the solar produced. What we have figured out is that since not so long ago, so we estimated approximately a year by today, it actually merits to transport solar power from day to night. So you suddenly get into a position where you generate the power during the day and you store it in a battery and you deliver it at night. So I can't really make it any simpler than this because it is very simple. That's also what we see as one of the strengths of the solution. If it's
That
simple, it gets
might sound
applied.
pretty simple, but it is not.
Well, it sounds simple, right? But because it is, and why wasn't this feasible until now? Because batteries, to have a battery doing that type of work, getting power during the day, bringing it to the night, just couldn't compete with whatever you could buy else, where you could buy your power elsewhere. Um, Now, the fact that this is suddenly possible due to price changes and price declines in battery and in solar has some rather pivotal consequences, and this is where a lot of people misunderstand the potential of the change. The thing is that suddenly, let's say an island has, and I'll just throw in some numbers, but we need to have a reference point. You have a 10 megawatt demand profile on an island. What you could do until now is do a 10 megawatt solar park. And as a consequence, your project would be small, you would have relatively high unit costs, etc. Um, Suddenly, if you go to a baseload profile, so continuous power supply 24/7, you go to a way larger project. you are going to 50 megawatt peak of solar. You're going to hundreds of megawatt hours of battery. And it's very counterintuitive for anybody working in this industry because it sounds like a lot of machinery, a lot of capex for just that small island, 10 megawatts of power demand. But if you know that these people are spending what they spend normally on power, so imagine that the 10 megawatt island demand typically spends 25 million US dollars on electricity alone. And that, just to put that into perspective, that is typically 10% of an island's GDP spent on electricity, on diesel. And that flows off the island every year, does never come back. And this is something that that obviously drains islands in, it also limits them in their development capabilities. If you would be able to generate all that power alone, imagine how much, how much more of that GDP you could keep on the island, how much more you could develop. So this is the why we're doing things. We see the possibility to really help islands keep a lot more of their GDP on the island and use it for good ends. For us in the what and in the application, getting there is actually a good business case. We see the possibility of developing large projects on relatively small islands that are paid off in 10 years time. And maybe, so this is where maybe a little bit of introduction lack, but we are a group of professionals coming from the energy industry. We have done a lot of different things, wind, solar, batteries, hydrogen. So we bring that expertise in project finance, project development, project engineering, and we want to develop the projects on the island. Well, what does it mean for whoever is not in the industry? So if you develop a project, you're the one getting it from scratch, from where it's just an idea, bringing it to a point where everything is organized, from the income flow to the land rights to the permits. Everything is there, ready to build, and you find the bank to invest, to finance the project. You find the investor to own it afterwards. That's the role of a project developer, and that's basically making it happen. So, and this solution that we now look at, that works on islands, and that hence also the company name Charged Islands, and it works on islands because they run on diesel. Diesel is just by far the most polluting and the most expensive way to produce electricity. It's very sensitive to blackouts, and it's like already mentioned, impoverishing the islands just by being there. In fact, but it's the only option they have. So it's a catch-22 for them. You can't live with it. You can't live without it. And we focus on islands closer to the equator. I guess for obvious reasons. For the solar profile that is constant during the year. Focusing on the Caribbean at first, because that where are some French and Dutch islands. But in the end, this applies to any island close to the equator, in which there are a lot in this world.
Okay. So thank you for sharing. That's a pretty open answer. And my next question is like, where the idea came from? Is that just the math that you've been working with before, or there was some specific situation when you decide that that's exactly what I want to do?
It's coincidence, really. So I happen to know the director of the airport on Bonaire, and we just chatted about that and think about what could we do for the island. And 4 years ago, we did the math. We figured out it didn't work yet, and kind of over time forgot a little bit about the business case. And just I think 6 months ago, I redid the math, and I suddenly realized that okay, this works now, and it works by a margin. And then I realized this is obviously not only Bonaire. This is anywhere where they have comparable situations. And when I started trying to figure out, okay, there's actually a lot of places where they run on diesel, are close to the equator, where this business case actually works. We're talking about billions and billions of possible project value. So, and that's the moment that we thought we need to do this ourselves as a team.
Hey, that's actually pretty cool when the great ideas just pops in the mind when you just have a regular conversation with some random people. And I am glad that that conversation happened that time, and now you're running this company. And my question from the person who worked with the data a lot, I guess that data, it's one of the main pillars in the company when you guys are making decision which island can be electrified and what kind of profit that can bring to the island owners or the governance like there. Like, can you please tell me a little bit more about the data that you work with and where you're gathering the data from?
Yeah, absolutely. And so data plays a big role in building the business case, but also in the future deployment. So starting with the building the business case, it has turned out to be incredibly hard to get a data set on what the conditions are on islands. Get it, just building a list of islands with how much people live there, how much electricity is consumed, what's the price for the electricity, what's the population density, because that matters for the solution that we offer. High population densities is not an advantage. But also the further conditions of the utility companies, in some sort of quality of the grids. The bankability of a place is also often defined by the OECD risk list. But the couple of all of this information has turned out to be a headache, because it's just not on websites. We tried some tools to see if a list could be generated automatically. We didn't manage. And so a lot of the work that we've been doing now is basically by, let's say, educated cherry picking, and then actually diving into those places ourselves, downloading the PDFs from the websites, reading the PDFs. So that's very labor intensive to do that. So that's the first thing. That's for understanding where your best clients are. The other thing is what later in the implementation phase, we will be running a system that gives 98% of the time solar battery electricity, and only on some occasions an emergency diesel will have to jump in. So when do you choose to do that? And that will have to be based on weather forecasts and running simulations against what could demand profile be, what risks am I taking by leaving the diesel out still today and only putting it on tomorrow, et cetera, et cetera. So this is where predictive methodology on user consumption data and the weather forecast that translates into a generation yield will play a big role. And what hasn't happened on these islands is that none of these meters are smart yet. So nobody knows who's consuming at what moment, how much. And this is something that you obviously want to change and want to be able to also use in the future to do some sort of demand adaptation control during the, let's say, the darker weeks of the year. Even the Caribbean islands have that, especially when a typhoon is passing by. And that's where you want to be able to use the data and the knowledge that you have to ask a number of users to switch down. So there's a new, and I'm very sure I'm missing one or two applications or more, but these are the ones that we are very much seeing at this point in time.
Okay, that sounds interesting. And another question that I have, you said that you need to analyze all the data that you're gathering from the different sources. And how do you do this right now? Do you guys do this manually just based on your previous experience and your expertise, or you optimize this process and you're using some automatic solution? How this magic happening now?
Right. So the almost a shame to say, but it's all manual at the moment. We haven't found a solution to access all that information that we need on islands to build the hit list, if you will. Maybe one other example, by the way, is also important. We use just occurred to me. We use data that describes the solar generation yield. We use data from the Joint Research Center of the European Union. But that also needs to be downloaded manually and put manually into the into the model that we have built to assess the yields, which is also, by the way, a very important part of whether it's attractive to do something on an island or not, right? And the if one would be able to automate that process and to get that into line with all the other data that I just mentioned, the population density, current price of electricity, et cetera, yeah, that would help us enormously. But yeah, we don't have the tools for that.
Okay, so thank you for sharing. And just out of curiosity, if let's say you would be able to build some digital solution that will make your life easier, like money is not objection, time is not objection, something that will make your business better, easier, more profitable, and more streamlined, what would it be and why?
Um, I think that if money would not be a blockade there at this point, we would definitely be looking for a tool that would be giving us an insight of where we could do these projects against the best conditions, both financing conditions, but also the best um, local electricity price, space availability on an island. I could even imagine that an AI tool could point us out where on which island the land use and land prices are actually best suited for our solution. Islands like Martinique and Guadeloupe, they are pretty big, so they are, there's a lot to choose from in that grid, both in the grid, but also on the island. And I'm pretty sure the data is somewhere, on prices of the land, but also the type of usage of the land, where you could already have a tool point you like this part of the grid seems to, fulfill the condition of you can inject energy here, but this part of the island, same place, is actually underutilized space-wise. These things you could very probably automate and then correlate that with the information that you have on electricity price, etc.
Yeah. So basically, that would be something based on scrapping or parsing information from the different sources and analysis with AI engine behind that. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. Just to let you know, if you want to develop something like that, Dataforce, that's the place where we can do that. Just a little bit of commercial. And yeah, thank you for sharing. And if we already start talking about AI, do you use AI right now for some internal processes? If yes, how you do that?
Yes, and we do, but limited, to be frank. I think we do it in a way that a lot of people make their life easier, get feedback on presentations, get feedback on the setup of other documents, etc. But that's the extent of it. So I'm quite aware that there's probably a lot more that we could do, but this is just it's interesting learning to do something you often neglect because you're too busy, and then it's like you don't want to invent the round wheel because you're too busy pushing that cart with square wheels.
Oh yeah, that sounds pretty true. And what do you think about AI in general? If let's say like uh, you will implement the AI in your internal businesses, like that solution that you've mentioned that will help you to collect the data, analyze the data, and how that will make your life easier now. And what do you think? Is that would be able to replace the humans in this process in a few years?
So first of all, if one would and accounts for any industrialization or automation tool, you apply it to save work. So yes, it does push out some human work, But yeah, in our case, definitely it would liberate to do other work that is not being done because you are, compiling your Excel list before that. So, and just as with the Industrial Revolution and with all the automation that we have seen until now, yes, there's types of work that are going out, and then there is the possibility to do more other things. And in our case, there's more than enough other things that we could do. So no, I'm not too afraid of that in our case. Um, and yeah, it definitely would help because you would be able to at least figure out which island you need to go to. Probably you could get some help with organizations and names. You would have a dossier on an island without having to put all the effort of gathering that, and be more like way more prepared at the table once you get there. So there's just a lot of options there.
Okay, so thank you for sharing. And out of curiosity, where in general you see the AI, let's say in 5 years? Because a couple of years ago we didn't know about that anything. Maybe 3 years ago, and after that we just started using this. At least I did that for polishing some emails, maybe creating some prompts, something like that. And right now that's a great conversation body that you can ask any questions, get any information, any statistic. And that's pretty cool. And it saves a lot of time, especially when you're doing some daily routine. It helps a lot. And I'm really glad that AI appears in our lives nowadays. But what do you think about AI in a 5 or 10 years? Where that's going to be? Not just for the companies like yours and for your specific business, but in the world from your perspective?
Wow. Um, Good question. I I think humans are typically very bad in foreseeing anything that is transformational. We typically think in a very linear progression. So my answer will probably be in that direction. Um, um, I think up to a certain extent we will probably, like you say, kind of used in the daily rhythm. But I think for a lot of people, sometimes at least in my case, the questions that I put to AI. Um, are not framed good enough to generate very sensible results. So it's basically me needing to learn, to also devise the right questions. I figure that on this part, this is where AI can also make some pretty big jumps still, and in that way, indeed become very, even more effective. Um, I also just see, and this is the linear thinking, just the possibilities expand because the things that I can't do now with the standard AI, like I have just been describing in this podcast, I figure that there will be a time where it will be able to at least do it partially, and access, for example, what is now only to be found within a PDF, and that information is just now somehow not available to most AIs at least. So yeah, like I said, a gradual but still more penetrating role in our lives, I figure.
Okay, so thank you for the answer. And we're slowly but surely getting to the end of our conversation. And that's already kind of tradition to ask our guest for some final statement for our listeners. Willem, what would it be from you?
Well, I'll stick to my energy world, right? So, and I think what I would like to tell to a lot of people is that, and which people, I think a lot of people underestimate, is that renewables combined with storage is really, really going to displace everything. We are looking at as first steps with diesel. The LPG will come, coal and gas will follow. I think this is, maybe just almost as transformational as AI, but it's the era of subsidies is over, and the area of just plain commercial displacement of fossils by renewables is now really coming towards you.
Okay, so thank you for that. Thank you for your opinion. Thank you for being with us today. To our listeners, I want to say that this video will be on the channel pretty soon and we're going to spread it via LinkedIn. So please put some likes there and we will be glad to see you as our subscribers. And Willem, I wish you all the best with your business. I'm pretty sure you will succeed because of that numbers that you've mentioned and that idea that you're spreading and sharing that make a lot of sense to me and I guess to a lot of people all over the globe. So thank you for being with us. Thank you for sharing all this info. And for you guys, see you in the next time at the next episode of Empower the Data, where the business begins with data and AI leads the way. Ciao for now.